Welcome. I'm Bernice Ross, the CEO and President of Brokerage Up and RealEstateCoach.com. And I have my favorite attorney in the world, Marinda Neumann, is with us today. She's helped us in our business here at Real Estate Coach and Brokerage Up for a number of years. And Marinda is an expert on cybersecurity. And she's joining us for today with a great session called Keeping Your Data Safe in an Unsafe Environment. Marinda is the managing attorney at Lotus Law Firm. So Marinda, welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Bernice, for having me.
Well, delighted to have you with us. So let's get to it and talk about, first of all, let's just take a look at what some of the risks are out there and what some of the best practices are. And you've identified three that we need to pay attention to: malware, ransomware, and phishing. So let's start with malware and talk about best practices for each one of these, and then what people can do to keep themselves safe.
Okay, so you mentioned malware, phishing, and the ransomware, and they're not new terms. We're all very familiar with them, and so generally speaking, I'll define what they are. And I think the biggest trends that we're seeing now is just how the hackers are using them and sort of how they're changing their target audience. So ransomware is one where you might receive an email, or the hacker might otherwise gain access to your network, and then they shut down the networks and they hold your data as hostage for some said fee or said ransom. The phishing attacks, we see those via email. That's where it's a spoofed email address, or there's a spoofed link that's embedded in that email, and it somehow entices the user to click on that link and redirects you to a spoofed page or something like that, which then oftentimes prompts you to log in and then therefore has your login information and is compromised that way. What's new with the phishing scams now is they're using different devices or mechanisms, rather, via text messages, WhatsApp, Facebook messaging, those kind of things. So as users, we're pretty suspicious of email. We've heard it frequently enough, and so we're more cautious when we're using our email. But in these other applications like WhatsApp or text messaging, we're more trusting and we're more likely to maybe click on a link. And so, again, these are all things that we've heard of, and the technology, the methods are not that much different, but they're sophisticated tools that they use, and they lure us in. One of the biggest ones in the real estate industry is the wire transfer phishing scheme.
Oh, now let's talk about that, because a lot of people have, your clients wire money to one of these fake addresses, it's gone.
Exactly.
This is scary stuff. So let's talk about what can I do as an agent and what can brokers do to make sure that doesn't happen.
Okay, so the first thing is really to have that as a broker, to have that conversation with your agent, and as an agent to have that conversation with your clients. And there's some tools we'll go into. Pardon me, I lost my train of thought there. Not necessarily tools, but best practices, processes that you can have in place. And again, it starts with that conversation. What's often recommended is when you're speaking with the consumer, the home buyer, to tell them, okay, these are the two folks that will give you wire transfer instructions. It might be, some bank official or some financial individual plus the agent or the broker, whoever those two people might be. The consumer, though, knows that they're only going to receive instructions from those two folks. Tell the consumer not to transfer any information via email. It's never a safe vehicle to transfer financial information via email. If you receive a phone call with a change of instructions or an email with a change of instructions, hang up or don't reply to the email and call one of those trusted people that were identified early on in the transaction and confirm that information.
So that way, you're saying that best practices then, okay, number one, to identify the two people who will be involved in your wire transfer, one on the sending side and one on the receiving side, probably.
Right.
And before you transfer any money, call both of them to say, here are the instructions I have received. Are these correct? And if they are, then you can do the transfer. So it's a 3-step process. You identify the safe people, then you verify before you transfer, and then only do the transfer then. Or in my, in my mind, I'm almost saying, let's go back to doing cashier's checks, which
in some cases,
it works. It worked for a lot of years,
And the other corollary to that is if you get an email that says, call me for instructions with some phone number, don't trust that phone number. Trust the phone numbers that you had from your original transaction, your original conversation with those folks, and use that phone number, because that's another method is they'll intercede and they'll redirect. So instead of calling the person you think you're calling on the other end, you've been redirected to a third party. So
another thing is to make sure that you have the correct phone numbers for those 2 trusted people and the correct emails, but you want to verify with a phone call when you wire transfer,
absolutely,
to the number, and verify the routing instructions. So that's the safest way to do it. That's a great suggestion. I've never heard anybody outline it that way before, Marinda. So that's, simple, clear, and I like, then who's going to be handling it. Now, if it turns out your escrow officer or your title officer is on vacation and you need to get a backup person at the title company or at the escrow who will be handling it. So, okay, I want to go back to, let's assume that my data has been captured by malware. What can I do?
If your data has been captured by malware, well, you're going to want to report it. Oftentimes, the FBI is involved in those things, and there's resources that you can do with the FBI. Most companies, they're fearful to report it because it's a compromise, but it is a crime. And in those cases, you're considered a victim, and they will do what they can to help you. You want to notify your insurance provider. The first thing you're probably going to want to do is notify your IT department or the vendor or someone in a position that can help you technologically, depending on what system has been hacked, in order to try to thwart that attempt, whatever it might be. If you've got backup systems, you're going to want to disconnect those from whatever your central system is, so if you don't lose any of that data. But the fix is often very depends on the kind of system that you're
one of these, an external drive.
Yes.
2 of them, so you have everything backed up, and that way, because they probably won't get to my external drive, right? Or will they?
There's probably some sophisticated hacks out there that can get to your backup, but generally it is on your, they're going to be targeting your primary system. Hopefully you have firewalls in place and things like that would help prevent them from jumping from one system to the next. Oftentimes, for example, if you're using a cloud server for a backup system, they would have to get through that secondary layer. Now, that's where, when we were talking about phishing earlier, you have these business compromises where the phishing spoofs, instead of spoofing a financial institution like your bank or your credit card companies, which we're all very familiar with, they've taken a new tack, and now they'll spoof your Google Drives or your G Suite or those kind of services and prompt you with information saying, well, there was a suspicious login or there was some suspicious activity, and then you click this link and they redirect you to a spoofed site and ask for login information. Well, that you're not actually going to Google or whatever, Microsoft 360, you're going to the spoof site. So now they have access to your credentials, which could compromise your backup server if you're using Microsoft 365 or G Suite, for example. So, but it would be a multi-layered approach in that respect. That's not to say it's the only way to do it. As I said, hackers are very sophisticated, but.
Well, one of the reasons I don't like Google Drive is that I think it's more vulnerable. We're using Dropbox, and that's a lot harder, I think, to get into than Google Drive is. And also, I think it's just a much better application overall. I've stopped using the online backup because it was eating up so much of my bandwidth on my computer to keep updating constantly. And I've gone to a more hard backup. And
Mhm.
also with what I'm doing, stuff gets, it gets published or whatever, but it's different what an agent does, where you have, or a broker who has to keep those records. But look at keeping your records, probably on, a separate server, even a separate computer that doesn't have, your transfer doesn't have, if you've got an older computer, I've heard that's a pretty good way to do it too. It's just never connected to the internet. They can't get to it.
Exactly. Redundancy is always good if it's not connected to the internet. There's other, like Carbonite is a good backup service. There's other third-party services that, and some are industry specific. So you can always look into those resources. But again, like you said, if you have an external hard drive or a separate server that's not connected, plus some other redundant form, at least you'll be able to recover that data. That doesn't necessarily solve the compromise aspect of the data, but in that context, at least, you have a recovery process in place.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, if they have to wipe your computer, if you've done everything, if you've got it backed up, then you're in pretty good shape. I had a problem where Apple deleted almost, I don't know how many, MacMail deleted how many months of my emails. Unfortunately, Shane had all but 1 week, the most recent week backed up for me, so she was able to restore everything.
Yes.
So,
And, it's not to mention, it's just a peace of mind to have. Once that information is compromised, there's, things as business owners or just business professionals that or we're incumbent upon us to do, but at least if you have that backup recovery process, you're at least part of the way there.
the ones I particularly like are the ones that tell me that they connected my computer and they caught me using my webcam looking at porn. I thought, yeah, right. I want to see that.
Right, exactly.
Okay, that sure wasn't me. Anyway, I want to go back though, because I'm intrigued, because I've noticed that you mentioned that they're using this stuff coming over like Facebook Messenger.
Yes.
And I've noticed I've been getting text messages and things that look a little bit funky. So I guess what we need to do is not respond, but, kind of like when you get the credit card call, or it's like you need to go back to the original site. That's what you were suggesting a moment ago about your transaction.
Right. One of the best methods would be just don't respond to it. The tricky thing is a lot of times they'll come in as text for 20% discount off, something from this retail store or something like that. And it might be a place that you shop. And so it's not immediately aware to you that might be unsafe. So it's always best not to respond or not to click on the links. There is a site, and I'm going to look, I have it on my notes here. There's a thing called the US short code directory. So you can look up the link, and if it's in there, then it's a legitimate link to whatever that vendor or retail service provider is. So that's another thing that you can do if you just want to take that extra step and look it up before clicking on it.
Well, I hadn't heard that. I think that's a great suggestion. One of the things that I always do is if it looks suspicious, Shane always reminds me, click on the address. But I've had a couple recently I've had to send to her because I couldn't tell. So, I don't know what she's looking at, that US short code directory. Boy, that's a great suggestion, Marinda. That's something I haven't heard about. So we talked about ransomware, malware. Let's talk a little bit more about malware, because, that is something that you can deal with. What are some of the systems that that you're using on your machine to protect you from malware?
Well, I use McAfee. It's a standard, well-respected, frequently updated. There's a lot of other antivirus, anti-spam softwares. I can't really endorse one over the other because, all are good and all have their flaws, right? But really the key there is making sure that your systems are up to date, and that you're regularly updating those systems, and your software, your devices, like your cell phone, your Apple, whether it be an iPhone or whether it be a Samsung or whatever. Those companies are constantly putting in security updates to prevent these kind of hacks from infringing your systems. So just make sure that the software is up to date. Keep your eyes out on the news and those kind of resources just to hear what's happening. Inman and NAR often post, news articles specific to the real estate industry, but data security and data privacy are huge things in the business world in general. So there's plenty of information out there that can kind of keep you sort of attuned to what's out there. But really the key there is just have good antivirus software, keep your systems up to date, use encryption where you can, use firewalls at all times. Again, don't click on things you don't recognize, and don't open emails from people you don't recognize. They're all the same things that we've been hearing over and over, but right now it's kind of a across the board with all your technology philosophy, as opposed to just maybe email or just maybe your desktop computer.
Well, I tell you what, I've been using, I went through about 3 different systems for protection on my Mac, and I ended up Malware, and I've really been happy with them. They, I had 2 different systems I had run, and they weren't picking things up, and that Malware on their free version picked up, and then, of course they, you've got the, they identify what the problem is, but if you want, you want to get rid of it, you've got to pay them. So. That's how that works. That's a whole different thing. So let's assume now that my data has been breached, and I own a brokerage. Maybe I'm a small broker. I know the bigger companies will have IT departments and people that handle this. But if I'm kind of just a small broker, it's me and maybe someone else that works in terms of senior leadership with me. What can I do to protect myself? Or what do I have to do if my company's system gets hacked, or one of my agents who is using the system gets hacked?
Okay, well, part of that depends on what kind of a hack what kind of a hack it is. If it's a phishing scam that involves a wire fraud, wire transfer, you're going to want to contact the FBI. They often have some in your local area. There's been a huge influx between 2015 and 2017, and that stat's a little bit old, but targeting the real estate industry because it's such a large transaction, right? So that is an increase that they've seen, and so the FBI can, if they're notified soon enough, they can try to intercept the money moving, and then it can be recovered and returned to the consumer. But if you don't notify them quickly enough, it might already be gone. So the first thing in that context would be to contact the FBI. And notify them, and then contact the bank immediately. Maybe you do those at the same time, have one person calling the bank while one person's on the phone with the FBI. So if it's that's probably the most significant risk, the largest immediate impact, I would say. And then you go through the process of identifying how the breach occurred, and updating your systems. That might be contacting your IT department. That might be, almost certainly includes training. And again, that's just going to depend on the source. If it's a ransomware, as I mentioned, you're going to isolate your backups as quickly as you can. Contact whatever vendors, IT service providers you have to help you access or re-access your systems or recover your systems, whatever that process might be. In any case, regardless of what type of a breach it is, if you have client data that's been compromised, every state has a breach notification law. So as a business owner, with that information, if your client's data has been compromised, you have to notify each and every one of those clients. Obviously, that's going to follow a brief, investigation period, so you can kind of identify what the breach was, what kind of information was compromised, whose data was involved in all of that. So it's going to be a process, and it's going to be a little case by case. But the first steps in most cases is, report it if it's, as I said, the wire transfer, and then try to isolate your systems and secure them to the extent that you can. Notify those IT professionals, and try to recover the system, to the best of your ability, I guess. Sometimes that might be starting over, but again, as we mentioned earlier, if you have a data backup, that recovery process is going to be a little bit shorter term than if you don't have those processes in place. So a lot of this is really more preventative. It's always better to avoid it if you can. That's not always possible, but if you have these redundancies in place through your backups, through your firewalls, through your software, through encryption, through multi-factor authentication, those kind of things, you remove yourself from that risk. And again, as I said, training, train your staff, train those folks that you work with, train your clients so that they understand what those processes are and can help you avoid breaches.
Well, those are all great suggestions. Now, you talked a little bit about something called cybersecurity insurance and data breach insurance when we were prepping for today's video. What are those? How do they work? And what's the difference?
So cybersecurity insurance cybersecurity is basically how do you secure your system? What tools do you have in place, whether it be software or hardware, physical security barriers. So that's the preventative side. And oftentimes we go with third-party vendors or just the equipment choices that we make, those kind of things. So cybersecurity insurance on that respect provides a level of insurance, whether it be for against a lawsuit in the event of a failure on your cybersecurity side, whether it be internal failure by staff or something to that extent. All of them vary a little bit, so you have to talk to your insurance provider, but really it's on that end of the security aspect.
Would this be my business insurance, or would this be something that might flow through my for my rider, my override on my house, and my blanket with umbrella insurance?
No, this would more than likely it's with your business insurance, and usually it's separate. So if you have just a regular business owner's policy or a liability policy or something like that, it's usually not included. It's usually separate. That's not to say that there aren't products out there that it's all inclusive, but usually it's separate. And cybersecurity and data breach are often separate insurance. The data breach is that insurance that covers in the event of a data breach. So all of the aftermath of a data breach. And again, what that covers is
that pay for me to bring in the professionals I need to take care of the data breach. Is that what that's for?
Right. And again, it's going to depend on the insurance provider as to what those services entail and what's covered and all of that.
Okay. Wow. So we talked about what happens when you get hacked. We talked about the cybersecurity. Any final takeaways for our listeners today?
I think the biggest thing for me is to know, to just stay aware of what's out there. We get really used to hearing the words ransomware, phishing, don't click on this, don't click on that. But the consequences can be as small as a nuisance to as significant as your homeowner or your home buyer losing their wire fraud or their wire transfer and not being able to buy that home or not recovering those funds. So the consequences can be significant, and hackers are very sophisticated and they're changing all the time. So it's incumbent upon us to be sure to just be aware of what we're doing. And we get busy, and there's never enough time in the day, and we're just trying to get these things done. And sometimes we click before we think, and the consequences can be really dire. So really, it's just keep that diligence and put those things in place to help on the preventive side. Take the time to figure out what resources you have in play, hardware, software, firewalls, multi-factor authentication, all of those things. Insurance if you need it, because it might be a little more cost at the outset, but it could be a huge cost savings at the end of the day. And certainly it's a lot of peace of mind. Also know who the resources are in your local community for reporting fraud. The FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, has some good resources. The Commuter Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, they have some very good resources for those kind of things, as does the FBI. And that's just for businesses in general, not just specific to the real estate industry. But the real estate industry is a target because of the size of the financial transaction and how many, and the scope and the size of the real estate industry at large. You've got vendors, you've got brokers, you've got agents, you've got large associations. So it runs the gamut. So it's popular to hackers. So maybe that's a little bit more than a short closing, but it's important for all of us. And I think due diligence is really the key.
Well, thank you very much, Marinda. This has been extremely informative, and wow, what a number of great takeaways from that you've shared with us today. We've been visiting with Marinda Neumann. She's the principal managing attorney for Lotus Law Firm. She's located in San Diego, California. I can recommend her. She did our trademark and way less than the other one that I did, and much more efficient, less hassle. And also, this area is something that she specializes in. So, Marinda, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Bernice. It's been a pleasure.